Welcome to the scriptures, histories, and companions of the first Nazarene. We will uncover the long-hidden ancient books, and we will read them. We will discover the intimate stories of our ancestors, the Nazarenes, and we will recount them. And those brave souls who established our faith, people like the brothers and sisters of our Savior, we will name them, many for the very first time, and they will be strangers no more. This is your host, Jackson Snyder of the Netzari Yahadim. For more information about the first Nazarene, join us at theyahad.org, THEYAHAD.org. Until then, we hope you will enjoy each broadcast of the first Nazarene. Welcome to the Vero Yahad. In 1980, it all started. We'll put it that way. I'll try again. A bulldozer uncovers a tomb located between the old city of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So when a new site is uncovered like that, the Israeli antiquity authorities need to be called. They send down an archaeologist and an artist to assess the site, to make drawings of the site. In this case, this is an open tomb, so they were able to get in. And the young Shimon Gibson, who is, I guess, a major celebrity archaeologist these days, when he was very young, went in there and did a drawing of the inside of the tomb, which you'll be able to see when I put it up there. Inside the tomb were a number of kokvas, there we got it, which are indentures in the wall, where ossuaries were put. An ossuary is a bone box, as you may know, about the size of, I'd say probably 2 feet in length, just big enough to get the thigh bones of people in there. The practice in those days was to lay the dead person out on a table, which they called in Greek or in Latin the refrigerium. I guess we get the word refrigerator from that. It means to keep something cold. So they put them on the table, the refrigerium, and there the place would be open for up to 70 days for anybody who wanted to go in to visit the corpse or eat with the corpse. And then after the 70 days, the place would be shut up to allow the corpse to rot down to the bones for 1 year. That's why we read about, well, in one story, the women brought aloes and spices, and the other story, I think, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea brought them, and they put them around the body in order to try to preserve it, or at least make it smell better for the time of the visitations. So they said the visitation would last up to 70 days, most often 7 days, before it's starting to stink, and then be closed up, and then opened up in another year, and the bones that were left on the table were then collected and put into an ossuary. And once in a while, if it was a person of some renown, on the ossuary would be put the name of that person, and then the ossuary would be put into the kokva, into the side drawer in the wall. And in a family tomb, there would be numerous kokvas. In this particular tomb, I think there were, let's see, I got it written down here someplace. There were actually 11 ossuaries in there. And the unusual thing is that 7 of those had inscriptions on them for who was in the bone box. Okay, so what happened was, after the archaeologists come in, then the Hasidim come in, the Orthodox Jews, and take care of the bones and give them a burial. And then the archaeology oversight takes the ossuaries into a warehouse and stores them, catalogs and stores them. When somebody doesn't steal one off the truck, like in this case, one of them was stolen. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but if you ever saw the first Raiders of the Lost Ark movie. In the end of the movie, the last scene you see, you're in a warehouse, and the camera is going back, and what you're seeing is shelves as far as you can see with arks on them, or bone boxes. And that's exactly how they house these things in warehouses. There was a movie that came out by the ones that were publicizing this in 2007. That movie is called The Lost Tomb of Jesus, which I have. The ones that were involved in the movie, James Cameron, the famous director, the producer, actually produced the movie. The naked archaeologist Simka Yakobovici is the one that actually directed and was in the movie. It's not a fictional movie, it's nonfiction. And one of the top scholars, some would say, he makes appearance numerous times in the film, and that is James Tabor, who also wrote books like The Jesus Dynasty and more recently, Jesus and Paul. I would suggest that you get and read both of those books because they're great. All right, let's see, where am I at? The tomb was then sealed up in 1980. An apartment building was built right next to it. Went up around that site. And previous to this, nearby, an ossuary was found somewhere else bearing the inscription, Alexander, son of Simon Cyrene. And you might recognize that name from the book of Acts and the book of Luke. Alexander and his brother are in Acts. Alexander, I can't remember the brother's name right now, but they were...
Rufus.
What was it? Rufus. Sons of Simon the Cyrene, the guy that carried the cross on the Via Dolorosa. Nearby in another tomb that might even be connected with the one I'm talking about is another ossuary with the name Simon Bar Jonah on it. And several other ones they discuss in this video that are really worth looking at. For instance, Simon the Cyrene tomb is like it's been underneath a desk in somebody's office for the last 20 years. Nobody's even known about it. They keep these things under wraps. Anything that has to do with the historical Jesus or his family or the true disciples, kept under wraps. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to shake the foundations of Christianity. And if you hear the scholars that are against this whole thing talk about it, it's just pathetic how they keep the consensus in light of the evidence. So, as I mentioned, in 2007, Simca put the puzzle all together. And for the first time, the significance of this site was recognized. And I'll tell you why it's recognized now. Because, like I said, 7 of the ossuaries had names in them, and all 7 of those names are familiar to us. They're familiar to us from the New Testament. And another thing that we need to mention before we start into the inscriptions themselves is that it was only in the 1st century that they buried people in this way. Only in the 1st century. So everything that comes in the form of an ossuary is from the 1st century. After that, they did it another way. They buried people, same before that. But at this time, I can't tell you why I should know, but they put them in bone boxes. Maybe in response to Ezekiel chapter 36, is it? 37. Those bones are going to rise. They're going to put the thigh bone on the hip bone and the hip bone on the nose bone. Inside that family tomb, and I'm not going into much detail because of the time factor, you can see a lot about this if you go to the site. Back on veriaha.org, I have the actual site for it, which we'll go to look at the inscriptions in a minute. The first inscription that I wanted to mention, that there's somebody in there named Yahshua Bar Yosef. Now, this is a very plain ossuary, and before the name Yahshua, there is the letter Tau, or Ta. Letter Ta looks like an X. There have been quite a bit of discussion about why there would be an X in front of the name Yeshua Bar Yosef, and the only thing I can think of is that that would be something you'd put on there if you were looking to be one of Yahweh's, because isn't that the sign that was put on the foreheads of those in Ezekiel chapter 9, Lee? Or 2? I don't know. These people were spared. It's like the opposite of the mark of the beast that was popular at that time, is the Tau sign that would spare the Yahwist unto eternal life. The second ossuary I'll mention is that of Yose, Y-O-S-E. Yose means little Joseph. Of the thousands of ossuaries they found with inscriptions, this is the only one of them all with the name Yose. That is significant for us because in the lists of Yeshua's brothers in the New Testament, there is one that comes down in the Greek into the English as Joses, J-O-S-E-S. But if you go back to the original language, it's Yose, and that would be the same as Jose in Spanish, little Joseph, the only one. And so we've got two guys in there that we know from the New Testament, Joshua and Yose, brothers. The third one I'll mention is Maria. Now this is the name Mary. It's in Aramaic. Is that in Aramaic? No. This is in Latin script for an Aramaic name. There we go. Barry, where I'm off, let me know. This is in Aramaic for in Latin letters for an Aramaic name. Now, we've always been used to calling the mother of Yahshua Miriam, like the sister of Moshe. But in Aramaic, the name Maria has a double meaning. First of all, Maria means something like bitterness, like maror that you have at your Passover. But Maria has another significance in the literature that's found in Aramaic. Maria is the sacred name. It means Master Yahweh. Mar Yah. We're going to encounter Mar again in a minute. If you look at some of the early Nazarene literature from Syria, most of the divines that write that literature are called Mar. Mar Abraham. What was the one we were just looking at tonight? Mar Salmon, for instance, which means master. It means master. So we've got a woman's ossuary, we assume, who is a Mary, but spells her name the same way the sacred name is written in Aramaic. So Yeshua Bar Yosef, Yose, Maria. Then we have another one that has been baffling to consensus scholars, and that is Mariamene He Mara. Mariamene He Mara. That is written in Greek. Mariamene would translate into English as Mary. However, Mariamene is the name of several Maccabean princesses, and the last Maccabean princess was married to Herod the Great, who murdered her and his two sons by her, ostensibly because she was supposedly having an affair with Herod's uncle. Does not seem likely. More likely is he wanted to wipe out the Maccabean line. So there would be no more Maccabees to cause trouble in Israel. So we've got Mariamene. In the literature, in the Greek literature of the New Testament, the word for her name, the spelling for her name is M-A-R-I-A, Maria. But if we go to the literature of the Gospel of Philip, we find in that Gospel that Mary Magdalene is the sister of Philip, and her name is spelled throughout that gospel this way, just like the Maccabean princess. Now, we've been told that that means nothing. That couldn't be Mary Magdalene. Until we've just found in 2009 Coptic inscriptions in Africa that refer to Mary Magdalene as Mariamene. So we've just recently, here in 5 years, got a confirming witness for this name as perhaps that of Mary Magdalene. Her name would be written in Greek because of Magdala was on the border of the Decapolis, or on the border of Perea there, and everybody spoke Greek there. People tell me, no, in Israel they only spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. In Galilee, about 2/3 of the people spoke Greek. 2/3. About 1/3 spoke Aramaic. So the Galilee was primarily a Greek area, and if you read your Josephus, you'll find that the Greeks were always fighting with the Jews in every town. It wasn't one group massacring the other, it was the other group massacring the other. It's a wonder in Acts 6 that we read about these Hellenist widows that were not getting enough in the dole to live. How in the world Nazarenes and, I should say, Hebrews and Greeks could live together, even though they were all Jews of some type, is beyond belief when you read about how they fought. So the second two words in that inscription is he, which means the in Greek, Mara. Mara means master. And the A on the end is feminine. So it means female master. So we've got Mariamene the master. And we talked about the Gospel of Philip, being her sister, and that the name is spelled in the ancient texts as the same as the Maccabean queen. So the assumption here is that Mariamene was, or Mary Magdalene was close enough to the family to find herself in the family tomb. And the apocryphal literature pretty much proves that, if it's true, because it talks about Mary Magdalene being the Havera of Yahshua. The Havera, which means the companion, the close friend. We in the Vero Yahad were Havarim. I know you've heard that word in the Hebrew Roots movement. But in the apocryphal literature, she is the companion. And in one particular text, it tells us that some of the disciples were kind of perturbed because Yahshua would always kiss her on the, well, we don't know on what, because there's a little lacuna in the text there. There's a hole in the text. So, of course, the consensus is kissed her on the mouth, but it could have been on the cheek or on the ear, who knows. Then, of course, what comes up here most recently is the so-called Gospel of Jesus' wife, which now some scholars are calling authentic. Well, what would be authentic about it is that it's all writing on, I think it's on papyrus, and it dates from the 5th century. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is authentic in that it's ancient, and the script on it is ancient, but it doesn't have anything to do with whether Yahshua had a wife or not. It has nothing to do with that. And the fact is, it wouldn't make any difference to me whether he did or not. What difference would it make? Well, suppose he did, and they had a child. Wouldn't that be a crime? Our spotless master being the father of a child? Well, I've got to tell you about the 5th inscription in the family tomb, and that's Yehuda bar Yeshua. So we've got a Jude, the son of Yeshua, in there. And the speculation is on the tomb movie is that, yes, we've got Mary Magdalene in there, we've got Jesus in there, now we've got their child. Obviously they're married and this is a child. Yehuda bar Yeshua. You don't think so?
Yeshua HaMashiach had a child.
That's what they tell us on the movie. They're trying to be, this is a tremendous find, but they're trying to be spectacular. Why? Because they got James Cameron as the producer. They got to make some money on this, and they didn't.
Yeah, but what did he say, Jackson? I didn't hear what he said.
Who? What did you say?
The guy that responded there.
Oh, yeah, Commander?
I said, no, Yeshua could not have a human child.
He said Yeshua could not have a human child. Why, Commander?
Because of the Nephilim.
Because of the Nephilim, he says. That sounds like 1 Corinthians chapter 10, why a woman has to wear a hat on her head.
Well, if you figure that the Nephilim were judged for all eternity because they had relations with earth women, and what they had as offspring was the Nephilim, who had to be destroyed. So if Yeshua, who was of, I'll say, Elohim's stuff, had sex or intercourse with a human woman, he would have been at fault of the same crime as the watchers.
Did you hear that? That is a great
I did hear the interesting idea.
Come on over here and tell us that again.
If Yeshua had had sex and intercourse with a human earth woman, he would have been guilty of the same crime as Yahweh judged the watchers and produced the Nephilim. The mixing of the seed. In my opinion, in my understanding, Yeshua could not have had an earthly child, or else he would have been as guilty as the Nephilim, as the watchers.
Well, then how do you deal with the issues that would rise? Oh, well, this is not the time to talk about Jesus and his wife. But someday we ought to talk about the evidence in the New Testament that Jesus had a wife.
I think maybe that would be something you ought to talk about next Tuesday night. Why don't you get that ready?
Tuesday. Because next Tuesday night is election night and I have other things to do.
All right, well, we'll make it Monday night then.
Perhaps.
You got so much interesting to say, Rabbi Barry, that you need to say it, and then we need to stand back in awe. It says in Josephus concerning the Essenes that they didn't have children of their own. They took in children to train them and to lead them. There's evidence that this fellow in Acts named Theudas, who led 400 people out and the Jordan parted, and he led them out into the wilderness, or he was going to do that, and the Romans swooped down on them and killed a bunch of them, sent a bunch to slavery, and then beheaded. Theudas is, in fact, a code name for Yehuda, Jude. So what I was thinking, if that is indeed a fact, and Theudas was the leader of that Messianic group that took these people out, or was going to take people out into the desert, and if Theudas is a fill-in for him by this dishonest author named Luke, that maybe he had a child that had to be taken in. And when we read in the Roman historians that the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Jude, Yehuda, were called in before the emperors Domitian and then Trajan, and that the emperor Domitian considered them just simple farmers and sent them home, but Trajan had them crucified, then that's a real possibility. It's a scenario I'm trying to work out. If Jude or Theudas or this James that was beheaded, Luke has people to protect, you see. That's the way I'm going to be very optimistic about it. Luke, in Acts especially, has people to protect, so he downplays them, gives them a nickname, an alias, a code name. I want to do something on that one of these days. I got the note already, just haven't done it yet. So maybe Yeshua and maybe his mother took in this son, and if it was a Levirate kind of thing, then he would be labeled the son of Yeshua. All right, enough for that. I'm going to spill some beans right here with a new theory. I've sent it in a few times to James Tabor, and he won't even acknowledge it. But you listen to it and see if it makes sense to you. The sixth ossuary has a very simple Aramaic inscription on it. It's Matya. Matya. All right, in Hebrew, that's Matit Yahu. It means reward of Yahweh. So there's a Matya in there, and they think what the scholars are saying, well, if this was the family tomb, what's he doing in there? He's not family. We read that in the New Testament. He's a tax collector. And somebody says, well, I look back in the genealogy of Joseph, and there's all kinds of Matithyahu's and Matthias, and there's this Matthias that pops up in Acts chapter 1 or so, 2 maybe. Who is this person? Is he a member of the family? The rest of them that are marked are members of the family, obviously, so I got to think in my mind, who is this? And I have been wacky with this for years. And I think I finally got it figured out who this is. Because we find Yeshua's undertakers, we'll say, Nicodemus and Yosef. They're taking care of the body of Yeshua after Yosef, who's supposedly a member of the council, whatever that is, goes to Pilate, the procurator, and sues for the body of Yeshua, and undoubtedly he had to pay for it. And he takes that body and he puts it into a newly hewn tomb that he owns. It's his tomb. It's his tomb. All right, if it was his tomb, where would they lay his bones? Where I come up with this idea is because of Yosef's name. I look on the map, and I try to find Arimathea, and they show me some little dot down in the middle of the Sinai desert. And then if you look it up, they say, this is the assumed position of Arimathea. And I thought, a member of the council coming from what amounts to a bodego in the middle of the desert? Not likely. Not likely. So I parsed his name. Yosef, okay, we'll put that aside. Arimathea would be his name in Hebrew or Aramaic. We parse it. Arimathea. What does Ari mean? Well, it's the symbol for the tribe of Judah.
It means lion.
That's right.
Ari means lion.
Means lion. It's the symbol for the tribe of Judah. And then we have Matya, which would be his surname. And there's, like this consensus scholars say, there's a lot of them in Yeshua's genealogy. So who do we have in there? All right, I go to Acts again, and I see this funny succession to the place of Yehuda, the disciple Judas Iscariot. Yehuda the Sicarii, the cutter. And who do we have there? We got two guys vying for it. One guy's name is Matthias. The other guy's name is Yosef Barsabas Eustace. Okay, let's look at that last one first. Joseph is the first name. Barsabas means son of the father, according to Frank Moore Cross. I don't know what that S is doing in there, but Barsabas means son of the father. It is a nickname, alias, surname, code name. And then we have a last name there, which is Eustace or Justice, which is an Essene title, Zadik. 4 or 5 other people are just Zadikim in the New Testament. So we could parse that away. It's a title. And who do we end up having? Yosef, son of the father. Yosef, my ancestor. He loses. But we put the two names together, and we got Matthias, Yosef of the tribe of Judah. It's just too much of a coincidence to pass up. These two guys vying for that 12th position are one guy coded in there, and that one guy is Joseph of Arimathea, and whichever one is elected, still the same one serves. This is the same guy. All right, so we got, in my estimation, we've got Joseph of Arimathea in there, and why wouldn't he be in there? Especially, how long would it take to write out that name, if it was a name, on an ossuary? And then there's one more. the 7th. How am I coming on time? I'm doing good. Perhaps you remember in October of 2002, the news came on. CBS Nightly News. I was in a hotel room. I'll never forget where I was. I was preaching a revival, if you could believe that. And the Nightly News came on before I went to the church, and here what they had found was an ossuary in some guy's collection that had the inscription on it, Yaakov Bar Yosef Akwi Yeshua. I'm assuming you remember that. It became known as the James ossuary. The inscription says, Yaakov James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Yeshua. That's a pretty singular find on a tomb. And then they took that tombstone, that ossuary, after the big news come out, and they shipped it over to Canada in order to show all the consensus scholars this awesome ossuary with this name so familiar on it. And they cracked it. They cracked the thing in half, if you could believe that. All right, so they cracked it. What happened then was a vying of consensus scholars to try to show that this thing was a forgery. And that process went on for years. And as it came out, after all the years went by, it was pronounced authentic, not a forgery. Not a forgery. Although a lot of these old fuddy-duddies from the Dead Sea Scrolls team and the second generation will not acknowledge this, because they don't want to find anything like a historical James or Jesus. But then the owner of the ossuary went to court. 5-year court battle. I can't think of his name. I'm thinking Oded Golan, but that's not him.
It's Golan Oded.
Golan Oded.
It's Golan Oded.
Okay, well, my memory would serve me right then. I just got it mixed up. He probably had a code name. And after 5 years, the Israel Antiquities Authority sued him, and they lost the suit. So Golan got to have his ossuary. And that meant that certain ones could do tests on that ossuary, like James Tabor. Funny thing about that tomb was behind the wall of the tomb was some rose-colored clay. And that tomb, in the course of the years, had become non-waterproof, and water started seeping in. It was rose-colored water. So all these ossuaries have a rose-colored tinge on them. Now the funny thing is that they don't know what happened to the one ossuary that was missing when the Israel Antiquity Authority took them out of there and cataloged them in 1980. One went missing. It just so happens that the one went missing had to have the same tinge on it. And the James ossuary did and does. So Tabor and his gang went one step farther. They had that patina, that outside coating, analyzed. And it matched perfectly with the other ones inside this tomb. So of course the conclusion we come to is that somebody in the Antiquities Authority stole the James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus, ossuary, from off the truck and went and sold it on the black market. So that tomb belongs in the tomb. That ossuary belongs in the tomb with the rest of the family members. It's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, because these patinas are not alike. The chemical analysis between what was in there and the James ossuary are exactly the same. I've seen the results and am amazed. Well, I wanted to... I composed a story as to how all these got together. I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to do it. It's probably going to take 20 minutes. But another thing I wanted to mention. What do you think the odds are that all of these names we know from the New Testament are going to end up in the same tomb between Old City of Jerusalem and Bethlehem? In that particular spot. What do you think the odds
Well,
are?
the scholars say that if you take the James one out, then it's about 15%. The problem is when you add the James one in, the chance of it being that tomb is 100%.
It is 100%. In fact, the Cameron's crew went to mathematicians, and if my memory serves me correct, they figured the odds of it not being the Bar Yosef family tomb to be 1 in 6 billion. That's what my mind remembers. So what you're saying has got to be correct 100% with the James in there, and it's been proven that not only is it authentic, but it's from there. It was stolen out of there. 100%. Now, why is this not the biggest news in church history to prove that the historical Jesus actually existed? When scholars, especially these days, there are so many minimalist scholars that are telling us that there's no proof that he ever existed. Why isn't this being taught? Go ahead.
I think that the reason why it's not being taught is because most people have not carefully read 1 Corinthians 15, I think it's 51, in which Paul very clearly tells us that the body must die, and that the new body that will be raised is a completely different body. The body that Jesus ran around Jerusalem with is a spiritual body, not a physical body in the sense that we are physical. And Paul makes a great point of that. Joseph of Arimathea, I think, did that as well, because on the patio tomb there is that inscription of the resurrection, and elsewhere on other ossuaries in the patio tomb are the very words that they believed in resurrection. These are people who knew for sure that Jesus was dead and also saw him walking around. They were convinced of his resurrection. And they were convinced enough that when Paul gets the idea, he records very carefully in 1 Corinthians 15 the reality of what this resurrection was like. It's not like we presume. The body remains in the grave, but another body arises. One that doesn't look like Jesus. One that even his own uncle Cleophas could not tell was Jesus. But clearly was Jesus, and they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. That's what it says in the book of Luke.
Now look, Barry.
I'm convinced.
Barry, can you go ahead? Do you feel prepared to talk a little about the patio tomb?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay, please do.
Well, first of all, you recognize the Haredi would not let anybody in. So what they did was they took a special robot with a light on the end, and it was a long robot that
Barry, they don't know
they
don't know what this tomb is or what it is. Tell them where they first looked.
There was a second tomb about 100 feet away from the one we've been talking about all evening. And that second tomb is called either the garden tomb or the patio tomb, okay? And that particular tomb, once it was discovered, was immediately closed. The Haredi would not allow anyone into it. So they came up with a solution on how they would be able to look inside that tomb, and they developed a robot that they could put on this long, flexible thing and put it down into the tomb. And they actually looked at every one of the ossuaries in that tomb, and there were 4 of them that were terribly important. The one in the front, they presumed to be Joseph of Arimathea's. Now, I know that Jackson disagrees. He thinks Matthew is that person, but nonetheless, they believe that one was Joseph of Arimathea's. And on it, there is an inscription of a fish, a kosher fish, with a stick figure coming out of it, and written between the body parts is the word Yonah, which is Jewish for Jonah. This is the most ancient symbol of resurrection, and it was found inscribed on a bone box in direct violation of the law that says, thou shalt not make unto thyself any graven image. So the owner of that bone box is willing to stand before God and proclaim he believed in resurrection, and the question is why? I say it was Joseph of Arimathea. He buried Jesus. He saw him walking around. He was convinced. But that's not enough. Others of those bone boxes that were down there had written in Greek and in Hebrew the words that suggested they believed in resurrection as well. So that this particular tomb, the patio tomb, is replete with the belief in the resurrection of the dead. It's a very powerful statement, being 100 feet away from the family tomb. And for me, it can be completely understood once you read 1 Corinthians 15 again very carefully.
Just a couple remarks.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Also in that patio tomb was found something that blew their minds, and that was the sacred name. The sacred name.
It was found on the box.
In the classic Greek style of writing it was in there, and one of the consensus scholars said you'll never find that anywhere in the first century. So the fish, especially the Jonah fish, who was it? It was the Naked Archaeologist tells the story. He got a picture.
Yeah,
of
it's
that.
Jacob of Egypt.
Yes, I always butcher his name. He got a picture of that fish, and he showed it to his 7-year-old, because the scholars are saying that's not a fish, it's a thing you put flowers in. It's a vase. What would a vase be doing? He showed it to his 7-year-old, and he said, "What is that?" And she said, "Why, that's a fish with a head sticking out of the mouth." The 7-year-old could recognize that as the sign of Jonah that is talked about in the Gospels. The only thing that you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. And they found plenty of those from later centuries up in the Roman catacombs, but never in Israel have they found that on ossuary granite or limestone. Wow, thank you, Barry. So there's 2 tombs there. Both are known generically as Talpiot tombs, but there is a wealth of information in this for us. And in regards to the resurrection, that's where I was going next. That fortunately you knew the chapter and verse there in Paul. There is a dichotomy of resurrection in the New Testament. Paul really has one way, and we'll say John has another way, when Yahshua comes amongst them in the same body that went into the tomb with wounds and all, and there are a variety of explanations for that we'll get into another time. They're extremely interesting. And now we're just about at the right time that we can close. I think what I'm going to do is put it all together in an MP3 and put it up someplace so you can hear how this all comes together in a historically fictional account of doing that. I would also recommend that there is a fairly new book out on this. It's called The Jesus Discovery. It tells about both of these tombs. It's got a lot of pictures in them. If you go out to my website that I gave you later on tonight, I'll have those inscriptions up and everything so you can take a look at them as well. Because if you read a little Hebrew, you can read them. A couple other things. Another conundrum that they're having is the symbol on the outside of the tomb. It's a chevron with a circle in it. And there is actually a Talpiot tomb Facebook group. And this is one of the biggest points of discussion. What is this chevron with a circle in it? I wish I had the picture of it, but you'll recognize it if you've read anything about this. And there have been speculation that it's a Templar sign, because the tomb was broken into at one time. They think the Templars got in there, but things were strewn around a little bit, but nothing seemed to be stolen. And there are a variety of hypotheses that this is simply a logo for whoever built the tomb. But what I see in that thing, again, it's a chevron with a circle in it. One of the representations of Yahweh was the circle, because the mercy seat, of course, there was nothing there. It was a seat. And so sometimes the mercy seat would be represented by a circle. And the chevron on the top, I know this is a little far out, but what I saw there was a lazy Dalet. A lazy Dalet. Which gave me the idea, if that is the case, it's a Dalet laying on its side, that maybe that is a significant in marking out a tomb where the ancestry, or actually the inheritors of the Davidic dynasty, are buried. Could be. Why not? Could be. Some are saying it's an occult symbol. I really doubt that. But take a look at that and see what you think. Otherwise, let's see if I got any other notes here. By the way, the book, The Jesus Discovery, or its predecessor, which I have here, the earlier book is called The Jesus Family Tomb, both by Simcha Jacobovici. That's closer than the first time. And they're very easy to read. They're for lay people to read, but they're full of pictures and you get a much better idea. So now you know, if you didn't before. And we'll put up some things about this to keep you up to date. And you might even want to go out and join that Facebook group Talpiot Tomb, because it's full of really smart people that are looking into this very closely. All right. I guess that my presentation is done for tonight. Is there a question or comment? What's on your mind about it? Does it give you pause? Does it bug your theology somehow?
So who was Jesus' wife?
Who is the wife? You mean in the...
Yes, who was his wife?
In the Gospel of Jesus' wife? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
It just tells us in the ancient text that Mary Magdalene was his havera, his companion. And we find that in the Gospel of Philip, which is one of the ones that didn't make the cut. There are two Gospels of Philip. One's Gnostic, the other's Orthodox, but I'm kind of thinking it should have made the cut because it would have made things a lot easier. But they based the Da Vinci Code on the Gospel of Philip.
I know.
The idea that, well, they took it a lot farther than that Gospel said, but the idea that the Desposanoi, the family of Yeshua, went to France and up from, let's see, what's the name of that place? You remember? I can't remember right now. It's in French.
Something Chapelle.
Yes,
something
right.
Chapelle. I don't know.
Yeah. It's on southeast corner between France and Deutschland. And this is the place that grew up the Albigensian heresy. So these people that were in Rue de Chapelle were they raised up a cult of Yahshua that you saw a little bit of in the Da Vinci Code. But there's the Catholic Church came in and destroyed all these people who were holy people, righteous people, really followed a lot of Essenic beliefs. The name of the book is Languedoc. Yes, Languedoc. It contains the transcripts of all these Albigensian people over the course of 100 years. It is fascinating. The people that thought they were the blood relatives of Yahshua, say, 1,000 years later, that the Catholic Church wiped out. They found all their records. And the book is simply called Languedoc. Languedoc. Pick it up if you've got a penny on Amazon used.
Hello, this is Jackson Snyder. We're going to take a little break now to present some very important messages, but we will be right back here on Hebrew Nation Radio.